Namaskar, everyone. A really warm welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining today's session. As Rahul said, today we're gonna share some thoughts on IP-led academic spin-offs. I think it's a great topic with what's happening all around in India. I think there's a lot of interest, growing interest in this space. Today, what we want to cover is, you know, around the IP-led spin-offs. There's been a lot of government push on increasing R&D and creating intellectual property in India, right? Over past few years, a lot of emphasis has been given on creating IP, right? And we see a lot of academic institutes uh, making good efforts in creating that. Now, with latest change in the NIF ranking criteria, there is a focus which has been shifted towards commercialization of IP. Right? There is a lot of ground needs to be covered, although in this space. When it comes to commercialization of IP, most of the time people talk about licensing the IP assets to another entity. Right? While licensing is a great way to commercialize IP assets, uh, universities that focus on R&D should also look at IP-led academic spin-offs as a viable and very important alternative for commercializing their IP assets. So let's first look at you know what are the IP-led academic spin-offs. Now there are some key characteristics that differentiate the regular startups from IP-led academic spin-offs. Right. The first one is that the innovation, the origin of innovation, is from a parent organization, which is a university or academic institute. Right. That's the first differentiation. The university spin-off must be a separate legal entity and not an extension or controlled body of the university. Right. That's another key aspect that it is an independent legal entity. Right. It's an independent organization which is not controlled by the university. The spin-off or the startup must exploit knowledge produced from the research or the academic pursuits from the parent university, right? um, a lot of times you'll hear that there are startups which are created by or um, are, are are created by the alumni of the university, right? While the universities might support them, provide them ecosystem support, etc. uh, they typically may not be classified as IP-led academic spin-offs, primarily because it does not use the research output or the innovations that have come out from the university. And we'll take a look at the example in subsequent slides. The last but not the least, the spin-off should be aimed at a profit generation or commercialization of the technology, right? So it's a for-profit entity. It's not that the research output has been used for non-profit purposes and all that. So these are primarily the key differentiating factors between IP-led academic spin-off versus the regular startups that are either incubated by the university or the academic institute. Let's quickly look at why we would consider these or why university should consider this, right? The first thing is about enabling the economic development, right? Creating a spin-off creates new business opportunity because you're looking at developing a new product, maybe a new market, or commercializing a new technology. So it's always about creating a business opportunity around an innovation, and therefore that didn't exist earlier. The second important thing is that it has a multiplier effect on local economic activities. Right? If you see the examples of university-led spin-offs, they have typically supported a lot of economic activities around the local community. Right? It acts as a it also acts as a catalyst to create a cluster of competencies around that technology space in which the university is in which in the areas where the spin-offs have come up with, right? And that's typically because university is where the spin-offs have come out or where these innovations have come out. They become the center of excellence around that technology space, and therefore you will see multiple, either the startups have come out or the auxiliary, technology companies, support companies, or services have come out. So you would typically see the benefit there. Next, around the commercialization of university technologies, right? At times you see that the research is so fundamental, or it's so different from the existing state of the art, that the existing companies may not be willing to take up or license those technologies, and that's where the startups comes in, or the spin-offs come in, and they help in commercializing those kind of technologies, which are typically having high uncertainties with respect to the market acceptance or product readiness, etc. Right? It's also an effective way to involve inventors in the process of commercialization. Right? The alternative to spin-off is to license the technology to the industry, and most often the inventors are not involved in the next step of the technology, right? Which could, involving inventors in the process of commercialization could be a very, very important or very effective way uh, to towards the commercialization, right? um, the other thing is that when you license it to the companies, a lot of times the companies are driven by their own business needs, right? So you might see that some companies, when they take up the technology, they may have a conflicting requirements, wherein they might say that, hey, why I do, I may not have enough market or enough resources to put on this product, uh, and if I put my resources into my existing product where I'm already generating a lot of revenue, then I can increase that revenue rather than focusing on this new product for which I might have to create a market or something like that. So with the changing business requirements, that could change, and hence, even though they would have licensed it thinking that they will spend some time and effort in commercializing it, but the business requirement changed, and hence the change, hence the focus changed. Versus if you have a startup which is focused on this IP that you've created, then there is a good chance that they would have proper plan and focus to ensure that the technology is commercialized. Last but not the least, the startups typically provide a lot better incentives to inventors through the equities and other benefits, as compared to a licensing a share in the licensing revenue that's coming, right? A classic example I can give is how the Intel was formed, right? The inventors were actually working in Fairchild, but there they did not have the equity options, right? So they were not receiving any equity from the startup Fairchild, and so they came out and then they created their own company, Intel, where they had equity options for the inventors, and that kind of shows that these kind of incentives are really important for inventors. The other very important reason for creating spin-offs is that it really helps in university research and teaching, right? It attracts and retains the better talent. There's very good example of Indian university wherein the professors are really talented, and they may not want to go and work in one of the premier institutes, but they want to work in this because there they get a lot of freedom to create projects on their own, or research projects, and create spin-offs. So it's actually a great way to attract talent. Also, if your spin-off has become successful in commercializing a product based on your technology, then there is a regular income that comes back to the university, which can be then flowed back into the research and teaching activities. It raises the profile of the university in terms of the contribution that it's making, and therefore, uh, you know, uh, nothing better than an example of a successful spin-off or a startup coming out of the university to showcase the leadership that university has in research and teaching space, right? Quickly looking at challenges that we face, although it looks all great, but then of course it's not easy. And if you look at the number of spin-offs that have come out from Stanford University in last 45 years, like let's say from 65 to 2020, it's only, or it's about 220 plus or so, as compared to more than 5,000 plus regular startups that have come out from those universities, right? So there are challenges. That's why, although Stanford is able to do 4 or 5 such startups per year, it's still a lot lesser than the regular startups that comes out, right? One of the bigger challenge there is the is ensuring that the technology that has come out from the research lab is able to survive the market ruggedness, right? Because a classic example I can give is the commercialization of Polaroid technology, right? We all know about Polaroid cameras. I think if you read the history of how the whole history of or the journey of this technology from the lab to the actual Polaroid camera, you will really appreciate the kind of challenges that a technology which has been developed in the lab, you'll appreciate that what could be the challenges in commercializing it, right? So that's one of the bigger challenges that you see in IP-led academic spin-offs. The other thing is with respect to the market viability and adaptability and acceptability at the customer end, right? Now, researchers are great technologists. They come out with great technologies. Sometimes it's futuristic, right? Sometimes the technology arrives earlier than the market, right? And so a lot of times you see that the product either is too early or it has not really figured out the market acceptability of that particular technology. So that's the other challenge we see, and there are many examples, of such market validation, lack of market validation rather. The other thing is about funding, right? To gain the confidence of investors that yes, this particular technology will survive the test of the market, and you will see a successful product. I think it takes a lot of effort to convince the investors, and therefore securing sufficient capital to allow you to migrate the technology from lab to market. It needs patience and confidence from the investors as well. The last thing I would say is about talent, right? Running a startup actually is, even though if it's a technology based startup, I think it involves a lot more skills than just building a great product, right? I think we all understand and appreciate the need of sales. I think sales is one of the most difficult aspect of a startup, right? You need to ensure that you find a customer for your product, then market acceptance and finance management, and all those aspects that are around running a successful business are required here, right? And if you look at the successful spin-offs versus the ones which didn't get those success, I think you will find that there has been lack of skills around some of these, or non-technical skills that kind of resulted in either the success or the failure of the company, right? So having said all that, right, the benefits of it or the challenges, let's take a quick look at what's the process, right? Or how do we, if you want to, as a university, if you want to start, what are the key aspects that universities must look at to go about creating an IP-led startups, right? So basically, it's a multi-step process, right? Or there are various aspects that one needs to consider, right? Doesn't really matter how you break down these steps, right? Whether 4 steps, 3 steps. If you look around the literature or the material on this topic, you'll find some people talk about 3 steps versus 4 steps, etc. Doesn't matter. As long as these all aspects are covered, I think we will be good, or we will be able to create a successful academic spin-off. The first one is for a university to look at and understand what is the strength of the university, right? Like every university or every organization has certain strengths, and this is the first aspect or first step wherein the universities must look at its capabilities, the core competencies, for example, which technology department has the best researchers in the country or in the region. What kind of infrastructure the university has to support the research in that particular field, right? Are there any past successful researchers on which the subsequent researches can be based, etc., right? So basically, the idea here is to figure out the unique selling proposition, right? Something that makes the university or the department stands out, right? So that's the key point, point number one. Now, this also covers not only the technical core competencies, right? It could also include the ecosystem, right? What kind of ecosystem you're part of, right? Do you see a lot of textile industry around it, or maybe it's the mining industry, or maybe it's the tech industry, right? Um, does the ecosystem gives us an advantage and augment the capabilities, the university capabilities or the competencies, right? Because remember, we are talking about a business venture, and for a business venture or a startup, the ecosystem plays a big role, right? If you are looking at, let's say, a hardware startup, right, and you want to build a prototype, do you have easy access to prototyping center, right, or the components and things like that? So assessing your capabilities, competencies, and your ecosystem strengths, that is also a great start. Um, you would also need to look at your resources, right? We talked about the skilled researchers and the infrastructure and all that, but we also need to consider the funding resources, right? What kind of research funding resources are we considering, right? Do we have access to government funds available for research in particular area, or are we looking at industry sponsoring research in certain areas, right? Or do we have funds available at the university itself to sponsor research on its own, right? Now, this is a very important aspect. The funding is actually a very important aspect, and we'll see in the example later that the source of funding could play an important role to determine what can be done or what cannot be done with the research outcomes, right? So therefore, this decision could play a very important role in the whole process of creation of a academic spin-off, right? Therefore, it must really be thought through carefully, right? There are examples in which the decision was made because based on the source of funding, whether we should pick up that research or not, or whether we should accept fund from a particular resource or not because of certain riders that comes with the funding, right? And the researcher or the professor or the researcher or the students may have a different idea about how and where they want uh, this research output to go, right? Therefore, funding is an important. So in a summary, I think the first aspect that university should look at, or the researchers should look at, is to analyze the core competency, the what technology expertise is available, what infrastructure is available, what are the funding sources, what is the ecosystem that we are looking at, right? That's a very important first aspect. The next one is to look at what kind of research we are talking about, right? Are we looking at pure research, or are we looking at applied research? Again, both could be very valuable, right? In the context of academic led ip led academic startups or spin-offs. The only difference, or the one major difference could be that if it's a pure research, then the delta between the research output and the final commercial product could be a little bit bigger than the applied research. But none the case, I think at whatever type of research it is, I think we need to build in the aspects of testing and commercial viability and the applicability of the technology in the industrial space, right? And this could actually determine our choices there, right? What kind of research we may want to do to basically with this particular end in mind, in terms of commercialization of IP then that's been generated. There could be a possibility that a university or a researcher might already have a completed research wherein you already have an innovation ready to kind of commercialize, right? And in that case, you might have to look at your source of funding, that how this research was funded, and what are the boundaries that around that particular innovation and outcome that does it allow you to create a spin-off, or does it allow you to just license it out, or does it allow you to do nothing, right? So I think you need to look at that as a next step. So that's again a very important aspect to look at. We are talking about IP-led academic spin-off, and hence intellectual property actually is at the core of it, right? Among everything else, I would say I would emphasize more on this today, uh, because it is the core part of the IP-led academic spin-offs, right? Now, what is an IP, right? If you look at intellectual property, it is actually an industrial property. That's how the laws classify it. That's how the whole IP system is managed, right? It is managed by Ministry of Commerce, and therefore, at every aspect of IP creation, there is a commercial. There has to be a commercial angle to it. When you have innovations coming out from your research, right? It's very important for you to identify opportunities to create right intellectual property assets from that research, right? When we talk about IP assets, we are talking about not just patents, right? We are talking about, of course, patents, because they are the technical solutions that you protect, as a central idea around the technical solutions. But you also are looking at test results. You're also looking at your technical know-how, which could be a trade secret, or there are certain aspects that can only be protected as trade secrets, and so on and so forth, right? You might also consider creating a brand or a trademark around your research and university and all that. And actually, I don't know if you know, but Gatorade is a great example of trademark as an IP that was created by the university, right? So there has to be very important analysis of what kind of IP assets are being generated as part of your research, and there has to be a proper effort around protecting those assets, right? If you don't do that, then you might actually end up in what you call as resume patents, all right, or an IP asset which is looking only good on the papers, that hey, we have 15 patents or 20 patents, or we have this IP asset, but there's no commercial aspect. So therefore, tying it down with the commercial aspect is very important. That's where the role of tech transfer office becomes very important, because tech transfer office not only brings in the expertise of creating IP asset with the best commercial value, but also it has the expertise to understand the market acceptability of the technology, whether in terms of licensing or in terms of a product, right, from the spin-off angle, right? So basically, I think tech transfer office is another very important angle to consider, or if a university is serious about licensing out technologies or creating spin-offs, then a good strong tech transfer office is a must. Also, there are certain decisions that are made when you create an academic spin-off around IP. Is what's the mode of transfer of IP rights, right? From the university to the startup, right? Because as we said, one of the key characteristic of the IP-led spin-off is that it's a separate legal entity, and therefore, and it's beyond the control of university. So there has to be a proper arrangement of transfer of IP to the university, to the startup, and it should meet the it should be beneficial to both, right? And that's where again a good tech transfer office is there, wherein it basically ensures that the startups' interests are taken care of. At the same time, the university has enough benefit arising out of the research that was done. So again, that's very important aspect here. And then finally, last one, wherein the university can play a big role is to help startups commercialize the product, right? And that's where the universities can promote, can help startups in terms of connecting them with the venture capitalists, provide them with various other missing skills that they have, and assist them, connect them with the right ecosystem, etc. Right. So all in all, I think these are the key aspects of the process process of generating an IP-led academic spin-offs, right? You can think of this as a sequence, and sequentially looking at your capability first and figuring out what kind of research, and then protect your IP, and then use that to commercialize it, right? However, the boundaries between these aspects is fluid, or these steps is fluid, right? So when you start from the step one, you need to still have your end goal in mind, and then you need to have an understanding of commercialization aspects, your IP aspects, and what kind of research you can do, and you begin with the end in mind, and then so all these aspects are interlinked, and therefore should be given proper thought at every stage of this process of creation. Now let me quickly give you a couple of examples on, or two rather, popular examples of popular startups that we all know about. Right, there are many good examples, but I thought maybe I'll pick up Yahoo and Google because they represents this. One of them represents an IP-led academic spin-off versus the other not, although they are in a very similar space. Right. So if you look at Yahoo, the inventors Jerry Yang and David Flo basically created the innovation, right? Or they came up with this innovation around search. Now, how they did was that they used the university computers, right, to develop the software that was finally the core of Yahoo, right? But here they asked university to look at and then say, is there any ownership of university in this work that we have done, or the innovation that we have created? Now, the university concluded that no, the university does not have any ownership on the innovation of the IP generated, because the use of the only thing that the inventors did was they used the university computers, which was typically incidental, but everything else was not funded by the university. Right, now funding could be directly through the uh, direct money, but it could be in other means also. But the university concluded that in this particular case, they did not own the IP, and hence Yahoo or these inventors were free to use that IP and create a startup around it. Right, although Stanford provided other help, and therefore it could be considered as an startup which came out of the university, but it is not an IP-led academic spin-off in the classic sense. In contrast, when you look at the Google's example, the inventors Sergey Brin and Larry Page, they worked on search engine during their as well during their university days. Now, the difference was these inventors, while working on when they were working on the government contract, or a project which was actually sponsored by government, and the element of their innovation actually came out from that research work, right? And so, and then university actually had filed the IP, and so university had the ownership of the IP, and all kinds of IP assets around this, right? So when it, and therefore the university owned that IP, and then it tried to license it out to companies, but at some point there was a decision made that looked like the inventors are the best, and are in best position to commercialize this particular technology, and hence they licensed that technology to inventors, and this company was formed, and we all know the history, right? Now this is a classic example of IP-led academic spin-off which we are talking about, wherein the IP which was generated at the university was transferred to the startup, and the business was created around it, right? And therefore you see there's a lot more benefit that came back to the university through this particular startup, right? And here also I think there is a very important role of how the IP was managed in this particular. I'll summarize this whole thing. I know I rushed through a few of these concepts, but I hope I was able to successfully give a broader picture on how the whole thing works. Um, as we discussed, IP-led academic spin-offs are less common, but they're quite significant, right? In terms of their impact and the value that it brings to the universities, right? It provides significant revenues as compared to licensing, right? It brings in a lot of research grants because there's always a subsequent research that needed, and that comes back to the university, and And if there is a university which is successful, or there is a startup which is successful, the inventors, the founders typically give a lot of philanthropic grants back to the university. And we have seen in case of Stanford, in case of University of California, San Diego, and many other universities. Of course, this is a source of local and national economic growth, because if a startup founded around IP gets created, then you typically see it becomes one of the big engines of growth in the locality. It's challenging, but it's worth the efforts.